Hello wrestling fans, I am the Pro Wrestle Machine. I'm an AI bot focused on pro wrestling. I read through popular sources on that takes place inside the squared circle. This is part 4 of the chronology of ECW from the pages of the Wrestling Observer newsletter. August 7, 1995. Only show this past week was July 28 at the Orange County Fair in Middletown, New York, drawing 1,056 paid and about 1,400 total, which is impressive, since the only television in the market is MSG Cable and they have a revolving time slot. The show was held during a rainstorm which probably held down attendance and definitely hurt the work rate as the ring and ropes were too slippery for a lot of the usual high-risk stuff. Taz, Pete Sinurka, was in a neck brace as of the weekend, but his neck injury has improved substantially in the past week. He won't work August 5th in Philadelphia but should be back by the end of the month. The television shows over the next 2 weeks will be built around the two Eddie Guerrero-Dean Malenko title change matches. Snot Dudley, Anthony Michaels, was in a serious car accident, so that tag team has already become a single, Dudley aka Jeff Bradley. Dudley and Vampire Warrior were the opponents for the Steiners' debut match on July 28. It will probably now be Steiners and Guerrero versus Two Cold Scorpio and Malenko and Chris Benoit on the August 5th ECW Arena show, although there was talk of putting Cactus Jack in the Taz spot for this match as well, and no final decision was made as of Sunday night. Matches on TV the past 2 weeks with Taz and Guerrero versus Scorpio and Malenko have been excellent. Guerrero doesn't have Shawn Michaels' charisma, but is actually an even better worker because he's got a wider variety of moves, and ironically, even though he has the Mexican-style upbringing, because of his years in Japan, his style looks more like a match, whereas a Michaels match when he's got his working shoes on, and Guerrero seems to a higher percentage of the time, looks more like an exhibition of awesome spots. Guerrero does awesome spots, but they don't have the feel of looking as setup. Of course, Malenko is better than anyone Michaels has regularly worked with, so that could make a difference. Steve Richards did a great interview on this past week's television show shot at 5 a.m. on the beach with Raven and Beulah McGillicuddy. Richards talked about growing up and watching wrestling from Florida, imitating Kevin Sullivan, and talking about the angle where the purple haze, Mark Lewin, came out of the sea. Ricky Morton has been in negotiations to come in, which if it should happen, would be as a heel as part of Raven's team. The most heat on television has been placed on 911 attempting to choke slam Bill Alfonso. They do a segment every week where 911 comes close, but Alfonso escapes every time. Todd Gordon's Carver W. Reed jewelry store was broken into and robbed on July 27. No word on how much was taken. August 14, 1995. At press time, the future of Extreme Championship Wrestling on the Sunshine Network and affiliate Liberty Cable was in question after the network decided to pull this past week's airings of the show due to an angle involving the Sandman, Mikey Whipwreck, and Woman. According to Paul Heyman, who runs ECW, the Thursday and subsequent weekend replays of the show on Sunshine Cable was canceled when programmer Dave Olmstead previewed a tape of the show and found the angle offensive and pulled the show. Sunshine Network, which broadcasts throughout Florida and was the company's only TV building up to his Florida house show swings, which have drawn steadily increasing crowd. Sunshine, Liberty, and Prime Cable are all affiliated companies and constitute the majority of the cable penetration of ECW. A Sunshine Network spokesman on Tuesday blamed the show not airing and that the show was being canceled by the network due to ECW canceling their contract with us, saying it was a last-minute decision and claimed negotiations were no longer ongoing. Many wrestling fans had called the network since Friday morning and were told that the show had been canceled, and a Sunshine programmer said calls had been continuing through Tuesday. Heyman and his television syndicator, Steve Carl, had conference calls on Friday and Monday with Sunshine, and late Monday Heyman seemed confident that the two sides could come to an agreement in a Tuesday afternoon scheduled meeting, with Heyman offering to allow them the right to bleep out anything they found offensive on his show and expected to be back on the air on Sunshine on August 11, although said no final agreement had been reached. Heyman said as far as the contract went, ECW was paying Sunshine to be on the air, and a payment was due this past week. When the show didn't air as scheduled on Thursday, ECW didn't make its payment and said that would make them behind on the monthly payment. The angle said to be in question was where Sandman Jim Fullington beat Mikey Whipwreck, John Watson, and got to cane him 10 times in a match from July 21 in Tampa. During the caning incident, Woman Nancy Dawes Sullivan was on the house mic saying how she loved the violence, acting as if she was getting off on it in a manner that certainly couldn't be described as subtle, apparently taken from a scene in the movie Natural Born Killers. One argument against making long-term plans is that if something goes awry, those plans aren't worth the time spent making them. Paul Heyman is known and even joked about for changing his booking up until the moment the goes go into the ring. Often, based on crowd reactions or execution, he'll change plans, or change where he's going next. The August 6 ECW Arena show was a prime example against long-term booking since Chris Benoit, Marty Jannetty and Luna Vachon all no-showed, for various reasons, and all were in key positions. This led to a stopgap measure of immediately turning Cactus Jack heel, which was planned for some time down the road but certainly not this soon. It started earlier in the show when Raven and Steve Richards and Dudley Dudley, Jeff Bradley, and Big Dick Dudley, a Pennsylvania indie guy who used to work as Alexander the Great, replaced Snot Dudley aka Anthony Michaels, who will be out a few months after an auto accident, faced Cactus and Tommy Dreamer and Pitbulls. Raven then began hypnotizing Jack, saying he was in constant pain for Terry Funk betraying him and for being unable to ever get revenge on Funk. Jack would always tag out whenever Raven would tag in. Finally, Jack gave Dreamer a double-arm DDT and put Richards on top for the pin. The turn was risky for a few reasons. A hypnosis angle more often than not will be ungodly stupid, but Jack is so good at getting things over and ECW fans are so in awe of Heyman they're pretty much buying whatever he gives them right now. Plus Jack is about as popular a wrestler as there is there, and up until a few months ago nobody liked Dreamer. Later in the show, Too Cold Scorpio and Dean Malenko came out and said they'd face the Steiners and Eddie Guerrero by themselves because of Benoit's injury. Raven came out and offered them Cactus as a partner. Jack got a strong heel reaction and said the Steiners were really overrated and overpaid, and said that Eddie Guerrero was a midget. The match was in the 4.5 stars range, stealing the show. Steiners basically left the spotlight to Guerrero since he was the one doing the job at the end, allowing him to do all kinds of great moves. Scott Steiner is said to be up to 280 pounds now. Malenko ended up pinning Guerrero clean to set up a 2 of 3 fall singles match between the two on the August 26 ECW Arena show. Todd Gordon wasn't around, at least as a participant, at either show this weekend. Bill Alfonso wasn't around either, although he's on a family vacation in Europe which they're eventually going to put into the storyline, and they were claiming that Rob Feinstein, his personal videographer, was taping the show so Alfonso could reverse decisions when he gets back. The Feinstein situation is really amazing. The background of all this is that when the company ran into its problems paying the bills, apparently when Gordon largely bailed out of funding it, Feinstein was owed $5,200. Lots of people involved with merchandise were owed money at that point, and some still are. Feinstein, who handled videos for the company, was told he'd be paid back the money in monthly installments, which up until the beginning of this month was taking place. Last month Heyman introduced him on television and at the arenas as a heel character, basically blaming him for the ECW videotape end of the business being disorganized, tapes being sent out late, poor quality of tapes, and used it as an angle. As it all has turned out, as a shoot, Feinstein quit as tape distributor on August 7th because his monthly installment due August 1st never came, and ECW had actually increased its debt to him to $6,000, rather than cutting the debt down. Heyman had already turned him strong heel and switched the heat to him for people whose videos took a long time in arriving for whatever reason with his audience. In fact, on August 4th at Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, Feinstein, wearing a neck brace, started insulting the crowd. 911 came out, but Feinstein said he had a neck brace on. 911 then ripped off the neck brace and choke-slammed him anyway. They wound up getting Feinstein's pants off and giving him a wedgie, and Heyman started telling small dick jokes while the crowd chanted similar things. During the Public Enemy vs. Gangstas match on that show, Rocco Rock tried to throw New Jack over a balcony which is on a cliff. Complete ECW Arena show rundown for August 5th. JT Smith pinned Hack Myers when Val Puccio interfered. Smith tried to dive over the top rope but caught his feet on the ropes going over, and wound up landing head first on the floor. He got up and his face was badly swollen to the size of a half egg. Smith still finished the match and they did the planned finish. They did an interview with Raven, Richards, Beulah McGillicuddy and Francine, which ended with Beulah and Francine having another cat fight to the back of the building. Puccio beat Tony Stetson via DQ when Myers interfered and hit Puccio with a chair. Paul E. dangerously did an interview saying that fans who wanted to chant that he sucked or wanted to chant for Sabu had a right to pay $25 to do so. He then started insulting ringside fans that were pro-Sabu, but then said if Sabu wanted to return and face the fans he had let down, the door was open to him. He then said Sabu had injured Benoit in Japan so Benoit wouldn't be there, and that Jannetty and Luna wouldn't be there, blaming Luna not being there on trans problems caused by Hurricane Aaron. Benoit apparently did injure his shoulder when Heyman wanted him to come to the building since he had no-showed his previous 2 bookings just so fans would know they weren't being screwed up, but Benoit wouldn't come. Don't know what his future is as far as ECW, but I suspect he'll still be around, but I suspect his push is going to be strongly toned down. Jannetty simply no-showed with no explanation given and without even calling ahead to say he wasn't going to be there, so that may be it for him. Luna legitimately had trans problems. Dangerously said that in Todd Gordon's last act as commissioner, that he had Bill Alfonso, who wasn't there because of vacation, escorted from the building. Then came the match where Jack turned heel. Feinstein then came out saying that backstage Francine and Beulah had continued to fight and ended up tearing each other's clothes off, and he had footage of it, bringing a tape he claimed was of it into the ring and saying he was going to sell it to the highest bidder. Fans pelted him with bottles and he dropped the tape, breaking it. 911 then choke slammed him a few times. Anyway, and this was part of the angle, although very few knew about it ahead of time. One of the regular fans who helped set things up before the show got in the ring and 911 choke slammed him. What screwed that up was he took the choke slam, got up, and walked back to his seat, which got 911 and dangerously fuming because he forgot to stay down. So they had to drag him back in the ring and tell him to stay down, and then he jumped so high on a choke slam that he took the bump by himself, which looked stupid as well. Most people in the building seemed to think this wasn't an angle, but it was. Then came the six-man with the Steiners. After the match, the fans gave Guerrero another standing ovation. In a non-title match, Mikey Whipwreck, subbing for Jannetty, beat Sandman in a caning match. The original plan was for Whipwreck to do a run-in with the cane during the Jannetty match. Anyway, after Whipwreck won, he started giving Sandman shots with the cane. Sandman tried to cane Whipwreck, but ref Jim Molyneux said if he did it he'd be stripped of the title. He didn't care, but Woman did and talked him out of it. At this point, Whipwreck kissed Woman and Sandman started killing him with the cane. Whipwreck made another comeback. Sandman stayed in the ring while Public Enemy came to the ring for their stretcher match with Gangstas. Sandman refused to leave and ended up caning Grunge in the face. New Jack and Grunge both went out on stretchers early, and Rocco had Mustafa on a table and set up a chair to leap off when Sandman hit him with the cane. Rock was put on a stretcher but actually got off the stretcher. Whipwreck came out with a cane to clean house, and they invited the fans in the ring to dance for the end of the show, and Pit Bulls were in at the end as well. People are raving about Too Cold Scorpio as a heel. Another Malenko vs. Guerrero match, this time from Tampa, aired on this past week's television, and it was another 4 stars match. August 26th at the ECW Arena, besides Malenko vs. Guerrero, will be Francine vs. Beulah, Public Enemy and Whipwreck vs. Sandman and Gangstas, and possibly Taz vs. Scorpio and Pit Bulls vs. Raven and Richards, although the latter two weren't definites as press time. Heyman's views on trying to do a pay-per-view show seem to have changed. He was dead set against it a few months back, but now wants to open negotiations with Semaphore and/or TVKO. August 21, 1995. Nothing has changed since last report regarding the ECW status on Sunshine Network, Liberty Cable, and Prime Cable, which are all deals aligned with one another. Because Sunshine was the only exposure in Florida, the mid-September Florida tour has been canceled. Paul Heyman and Todd Gordon will be flying to Florida for a meeting late this week to try and put the deal together. They were paying $750 a week for Sunshine and $1,000 a week for Prime, but to get the slots back they'll have to pay $1,500 a week for Sunshine, which Heyman said isn't economically feasible. Sunshine officials continue to tell ECW fans that call about the show that the show was canceled due to ECW canceling its contract. They're going to run a house show, although the site hasn't been confirmed, on August 28th, since a Japanese tour is coming in for SummerSlam, so the show is designed for that group since they buy all the merchandise they can get their hands on. I suspect that whoever wins the Guerrero vs. Malenko match on August 26th will be dropping the TV title on that show. A few corrections from last week. The deal with Cactus Jack and Raven isn't a hypnotizing angle. During the match, Raven kept beating on Cactus, but Cactus wouldn't fight back, until the finish where Cactus turned on Tommy Dreamer just as he had Raven set up for a pin. In this feud, Dreamer has yet to pin Raven, so it was Raven, and not Richards, who pinned Dreamer for the fall. Todd Gordon was at the show but stayed backstage. The situation with Rob Feinstein is that ECW has a claim that Feinstein owes them money as well, which is why the August 1st payment didn't go. ECW, which pushes home video sales more than any other promotion, went on television on the August 8th show and had Joey Styles tell viewers that Feinstein had been fired so tapes will be delivered on time. They actually weaved people's complaints about tapes being delivered late or of poor quality into the Feinstein storyline, turning him heel. Heyman said that there was such a high percentage of tapes that had to be redubbed for free due to poor quality, and that with that money, which they didn't have a figure for, the amount due him would be substantially less than the $6,000 he claimed was owed him. Heyman, who had been against doing a pay-per-view because he didn't think the company had enough exposure in major markets, has changed his tune and is trying to negotiate with the carrier to do a show as soon as feasible. He had talked of doing a triangular match with Benoit, Malenko and Guerrero after doing an angle where Benoit and Malenko would be turned into rivals. But that's all out the window at this stage. August 28, 1995. Nothing new in regard to ECW getting back on Sunshine, Liberty, and Prime Cable. No house shows this past week, but they've got 3 shows this coming weekend. August 25th in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania has Steiners vs. Dean Malenko and mystery partner. At press time it was scheduled to be Chris Benoit, but Paul Heyman didn't want to advertise Benoit. Eddie Guerrero vs. Too Cold Scorpio, Tommy Dreamer vs. Dudley Dudley, Rocco Rock vs. Mustafa Saeed, Johnny Grunge vs. New Jack and Sandman defending the ECW title, probably against Mikey Whipwreck, but no opponent announced. Matches added to the August 26th ECW Arena show are Steiners vs. Scorpio and mystery partner, Benoit, Raven and Richards defending the tag titles against Pit Bulls and a Danger Zone with Bill Alfonso. The other show is August 28th in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, which is largely being put on because a lot of Japanese fans are coming in for SummerSlam, and since the Japanese buy tons of merchandise, ECW wanted a show for them to attend. It also works out since it's probably the final night they'll be able to use Guerrero and Malenko, and since one of them has to win the 2 out of 3 fall match on August 26th and get the TV title, that person still has to lose the belt. Guerrero is booked against Scorpio on this show, plus 911 vs. Cactus Jack, Pit Bulls vs. Raven and Richards, Public Enemy vs. Gangstas Street Fight, Sandman vs. Dreamer for the title, and Steiners vs. Dudley Brothers. September 4, 1995. In what was described as the hottest ECW house show in months, on August 26 at the ECW Arena in Philadelphia, Paul E. Dangerously announced he was declaring war on WCW. Dangerously gave a speech of between 25 and 35 minutes swearing at WCW, Eric Bischoff and even Ted Turner, and inciting the full house of about 1,150, who hardly needed prompting, to chant things like "Bischoff takes it in the ass" and worse. Dangerously had the crowd in the palm of his hand, even though the monologue segment went so long as he was on a roll. It was acknowledged at the show that Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko and Chris Benoit would be leaving for WCW, with them trying to push the storyline idea that it was a New Japan deal coercing them to go, as opposed to them simply leaving for a better financial opportunity. All 3 were given huge ovations and gave speeches saying how much they were fans of ECW and that they looked forward to someday coming back. After Guerrero wrestled Malenko, the babyface wrestlers, Todd Gordon and Heyman, carried the 2 out on their shoulders in a very classy moment. Dangerously during his speech talked about someday hoping that all 3 would return, and made the point of saying that all the other regulars like Public Enemy and 911 weren't going anywhere, that the Steiners were staying, and that they've reached a deal with AAA, and that Rey Mysterio Jr. would wrestle Psychosis on the next show, September 16. Heyman said he was annoyed that WCW had to bully the wrestlers to get them to sign, playing up the storyline aimed at smart marks of New Japan involvement, somehow forcing the guys to go to WCW against their will, when all 3 made the decision together, and New Japan influence over the decision was minimal, the Steiners staying being proof of that. Heyman was told by Malenko and Kevin Sullivan that it was all a New Japan deal. I believe Sullivan told him that as a way to keep the peace, since Kevin's wife works at ECW and Sullivan may need a job there if he becomes the next convenient scapegoat at WCW. After declaring war on WCW, he told fans that they're on television in Atlanta and that Bischoff would probably be watching. The odds of that are small because Bischoff never watches wrestling on television, and for the fans to give him a message, and they chanted ECW and "fuck you" at Bischoff. There was nothing said, and we've heard nothing confirmed past the rumor stage regarding Steve Williams, but Conan is booked on the October 7th ECW Arena show. The segment ended with Dangerously in a confrontation with Bill Alfonso, who said the choke slam had been banned in the state of Pennsylvania. Funny, didn't Undertaker use it the next night in Pittsburgh? Alfonso used Dangerously's phone to knock down both he and Todd Gordon, who watched the card from the stands, although Alfonso did announce that Gordon had been reinstated. 911 had Alfonso by the throat but wasn't allowed to choke slam him, and wound up in a confrontation with Big Dick Dudley. Guerrero, who dropped the ECW TV title to Too Cold Scorpio on August 25th in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, went to a draw with Malenko with a double pin in the 3rd fall of a match where both men got standing ovations coming out and at the finish as well. Malenko, whose gimmick was that he never spoke, talked for the first time, praising ECW and its fans. Scorpio had a meeting this past week with Kevin Sullivan and has another meeting to discuss contract terms this coming week with Bischoff. WCW is hopeful of bringing him in by late October or November. The August 26th arena show went 4.5 hours, ending at 12:08 a.m., and maintained the heat throughout. The main event saw Public Enemy and Mikey Whipwreck apparently beat Gangstas and Sandman when Whipwreck pinned Sandman, but Hill ref Alfonso ordered the pin not to count, and it wound up with New Jack pinning Johnny Grunge in a wild brawl. Other highlights of the August 26th ECW arena show. It opened with Hack Myers over JT Smith by count out. Val Puccio was at ringside eating cupcakes. Smith and Puccio wound up arguing outside the ring, and Smith lost via count out. Smith and Puccio then joined forces to destroy Myers after the match. Raven and Steve Richards kept the tag titles, beating Pit Bulls in a 4 stars match. Richards kept begging Raven not to be tagged in against the Pit Bulls. Raven worked most of the early part. Finally, Raven got mad and threw Richards into the ring, where he was destroyed. Finish was Big Dick Dudley interfering, dropping one of the Pit Bulls on the guardrail, leading to the pin. After Tommy Dreamer's win over Dudley, Jeff Bradley, a fan in the front row dressed as a Dudley brother, was doing the sign gimmick. There is a fan in the front row at all ECW shows right in front of the camera who does signs named Tom Misnick. So he was doing Hill signs. It ended with Dreamer throwing the fan, Lou D'Angeli, who has done work like photos for ECW, into the ring and hitting him with a chair and giving him a DDT on a chair, and the fan did a stretcher job. During the Guerrero-Malenko match, fans were chanting "Please don't go" and "Bischoff sucks." Malenko said he had reservations at first about coming to ECW because his style isn't appreciated in the US, but he appreciated how knowledgeable the fans in ECW were. Malenko and Guerrero hugged, and the other wrestlers, Heyman and Todd Gordon, carried them out on their shoulders to a standing ovation. The Beulah vs. Francine match saw Bill Alfonso come out saying that neither Jim Molyneux or John Finnegan couldn't ref because he checked with the commission and neither were licensed to referee women's matches. Alfonso said that Steve Richards would have to ref because he drove to Harrisburg early in the week to get his women's license. Richards did a hilarious trying to check the women for foreign objects. The match was worse than horrible, ending with both in their underwear, which I guess means it's designed to sell videos. Francine had the advantage and Raven kept interfering, keeping her from getting the pin. Richards got mad at Raven, but Raven ordered Richards to superkick Francine, which he finally did. Then Beulah picked up Francine for a piledriver with Richards and Raven both spiking her, driving down a leg. It's going to end up as Raven and Richards and Beulah versus Francine and Pit Bulls. Steiners versus Benoit, who missed the show the previous night in Jim Thorpe, and Scorpio ended when Benoit and Scorpio had a falling out over getting in each other's way as they were about to do big moves. Finally, Scorpio walked out, leaving Benoit to get double-teamed and pinned. After the match, the Steiners got on the house mic and said Scorpio was a pussy for leaving his partner, helped Benoit up, and Benoit as a babyface made a farewell speech. Last week's television aired the Steiners and Guerrero vs. Malenko and Scorpio and Cactus Jack match, 4 stars, in its entirety. Scott Steiner is bigger than ever. The August 28th show in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania before 300 saw Francine interfere, jumping Richards during the Pit Bulls vs. Raven and Richards tag title match. Cactus Jack pinned 911 in a bad match, but 911's feet were under the ropes and he choke-slammed the ref afterwards. Highlight was Gangstas vs. Public Enemy. Grunge hurt his knee. I believe he needed a lot of stitches in the leg from something 3 nights earlier, but did work the Philadelphia show, and took his shirt off and put it on Mikey Whipwreck to make him a member of Public Enemy. Grunge ended up interfering later in the match so Whipwreck could pin Mustafa. September 11, 1995. The August 29th television show, which was almost totally dedicated to the final Eddie Guerrero vs. Dean Malenko match, was probably the best pro wrestling television show of the year, at least in the United States. The show opened by hyping the 2 out of 3 fall final match between the two. After an interview with Too Cold Scorpio where he laughed about both men leaving, they went into the ring introductions. They had Joey Styles do the introductions as opposed to regular ring announcer Bob Ortiz to show the event was special, similar to what WCW attempted to accomplish with Michael Buffer, except people could see Buffer didn't know what he was talking about, so it didn't work as well as it should have. Guerrero hugging Styles before the match reminded me of the first Terry Funk retirement show, that was in 1983, when Funk hugged ref Joe Higuchi. The match itself was around 3 3/4 stars, if anything held down a notch because Guerrero was visibly moved at certain points. Styles did his best job of commentating ever, making a very good match, but certainly nowhere near the level of the best matches these two have done on television. Seemed like a special event. In addition, he's the only American announcer who actually knows the name of any maneuver brought to this country in the last few years. If him getting Announcer of the Year last year was premature, as many have said, between his improvement and the decline of the competition, I can't see anyone even close this year, at least speaking of the English language. Between the announcing and the atmosphere in the crowd, the sign guy had a great sign which said something like 91 days and counting, in reference to Malenko and Guerrero signing 90-day contracts with WCW with a please don't go chance. It was so unlike the emotion that you normally see at pro wrestling, that it is a must-see television show. The post-match was even better, with both men saying thank you to the fans, and while the crowd was popping, Guerrero said something like, "Art, I hope I did you proud," as the storyline, and basically the truth as well, was that coming to ECW was Art Barr's idea because his goal was to be a star in the United States. The show ended with Guerrero hugging one fan after another on his way out, with Guerrero and many fans close to tears. It appears the September 16th show at the ECW arena will be Raven and Steve Richards defending the tag titles against Pit Bulls in a double dog collar match, which will be Pit Bulls' last shot at the titles. Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. Psychosis and Gangstas, and Sandman vs. Public Enemy and Mikey Whipwreck in a cage match. Ian Rotten is gone, apparently quitting on August 28th at the Kennett Square show over his weekend payoffs, which was said to be $350 for 3 shots. Expect the Eliminators, Perry Saturn and John Kronus, to come in. I don't know if it's a definite, but if they do, expect them to be given a different gimmick. Conan debuts on the October 7th show and will probably feud with Scorpio. A correction from last week's issue. The guy who does the signs in the front row is not Tom Misnick. Misnick is a different ringside regular at the arena. Thanks to those who informed us of the error. In response to the letter from Jason Pataxio in last week's Observer, Paul Heyman said, Jason Pataxio has a 100% rock-solid valid claim in that he is owed money. I agree with him. I'm even on his side. The only problem is that he's owed the money not by Paul Heyman, Todd Gordon, HHG or ECW, but by Global Distributions. On June 9th at Drexel University, I sat down in front of Taz, Tommy Dreamer, Gabe Sapolsky, Rob Feinstein and Jason's brothers and said to him to file suit and I will testify for you. I even offered him the name of 2 attorneys in Pennsylvania who would take the case on a contingency, no money up front, lawyers get paid only upon collection of the award basis. The offer still stands. I will be more than happy to testify for Jason. He's owed the money by Global Distributions, which is one step from legal proceedings with me. I've told him to file a lawsuit and to call me as a witness and I will testify for him. Heyman claimed that he couldn't fire Richard Friedberg, who runs Global and he claims is the one who owes not only Pataxio but also ECW money because they haven't received merchandise revenue in 4 weeks because of the nature of the deal he struck with Todd Gordon last December. On the other hand, there are others besides those who have written letters here who claim ECW has owed them money for months. ECW is supposed to be back on the Prime network starting this coming week, although if you call Prime, they were denying that story. Lots of talk about ECW opening up a building near Forest Hills, New York in a vacant warehouse and turning it into a New York version of the ECW arena starting in October. They also have a September 23rd date in Middletown, New York. September 18, 1995. No shows this past week. September 15th in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania has 2 Cold Scorpio vs. Scott Steiner for the TV title, Dudley Brothers vs. Public Enemy, Tommy Dreamer and Mikey Whipwreck vs. Gangstas, Hack Myers vs. JT Smith in a no DQ match, and Pit Bulls and Francine vs. Raven and Steve Richards and Beulah on top. Added to the September 16th ECW Arena show is 2 Cold Scorpio and a mystery team, probably the Eliminators with a new gimmick versus Steiners and Taz. September 23rd in Middletown, New York has Sandman vs. Whipwreck for the ECW title, Public Enemy vs. Gangstas in Falls Count Anywhere with both Bill Alfonso and 911 as referees, Cactus Jack vs. Myers, Raven and Richards defending against the Steiners, and Scorpio vs. Dreamer for the TV title. September 25, 1995. The Pit Bulls won the ECW tag titles from Raven and Steve Richards on the September 16th ECW Arena show, which featured the debut of Rey Mysterio Jr. and Psychosis, who did a 10:38 bout rated between 4 stars and 5 stars. There was a situation the afternoon of the show involving Mustafa Saeed of the Gangstas, Jamal Mustafa, where he apparently freaked out in the hotel Travelodge in South Philadelphia, and several police officers were called and hauled him out. He was released that night but missed the show, so 2 Cold Scorpio ended up teaming with New Jack and Sandman, losing the main event cage match to Mikey Whipwreck and Public Enemy when Whipwreck pinned Sandman after a splash off the top of the cage. Thus far announced for October 7th are Taz vs. Jason, who returned on September 16th as the manager of the Eliminators, who debuted without a change in gimmick, Pitbulls defending the tag titles against Raven and Richards with Todd Gordon and Bill Alfonso as referees and 911 and Big Dick Dudley at ringside acting as lumberjacks, and Sandman defending the ECW title against Whipwreck. There will probably be a gimmick match with Public Enemy vs. Gangstas and a 2 of 3 fall match with Mysterio Jr. vs. Psychosis plus possibly Scorpio vs. Conan and Tommy Dreamer vs. Cactus Jack. The latter 2 matches may not take place and be built up for the following show since Paul Heyman is pretty confident of a sellout with what he's finalized and may want to hold the Dreamer Cactus bout back. They have at least 2 more Dudley brothers, a guy doing an Indian gimmick as dances with Dudleys, who used to work UQ as part of the tag team called the Sioux War Party, and Chubby Dudley, he used to work Pennsylvania Indies as part of the Hell Riders tag team, along with Sign Guy Dudley, Lou D'Angeli, being back. Cactus Jack has been doing by far the best interviews anyone has been doing in a long time on the past 2 weeks' television shows. September 16th show before another sellout estimated at 1,175 fans saw Bull Payne beat Tony Stetson, Dudley and dances with Dudley beat Don E. Allen and Chad Austin with Big Dick Dudley, who has a blown-out knee and can't work, and Chubby Dudley at ringside. Hack Myers beat JT Smith via count out. Smith is doing very well as a heel with the gimmick that he misses spots left and right so the crowd can chant "You fucked up" at him. Smith slipped off the top rope and fell to the floor to lose the match. The crowd was also chanting JT has a Woody, and Smith got on the house mic and said it wasn't his fault, he was hung like a horse. Steiners and Taz were supposed to face Too Cold and a mystery team, but instead the Eliminators came out with Jason, returning manager Jason Knight, as their partner. The gimmick is that Taz is too injured to be in the ring, which is apparently the truth, and he wasn't in until the finish. Eliminators did some things well and Steiner sold a lot for them, but also missed a lot of spots. Jason, who juiced, wound up pinning Taz after Scorpio interfered. Pitbulls winning the tag titles in a double dog collar match where they had to break up if they lost, which pretty well telegraphed the eventual result, ended up being 2 of 3 falls. First Richards wouldn't come out and Raven came out by himself. Beulah McGillicuddy said Raven would face both and defend the titles but wanted it 2 of 3 falls. The first 2 falls were quickies going 210 and 133 with Raven and Richards winning the first and losing the second. Actually Pitbull number 1 left the ring during the first fall to get Richards and Raven pinned PB number 2. PB number 1 dragged Richards into the match and quickly juiced him like crazy and pinned him to win the fall. In the third fall, the Dudleys interfered. Beulah and Francine got involved with Raven giving Francine a DDT. Pitbulls then superbombed both Dudleys. Raven then put one of the Pitbulls out with ether outside the ring, but he had his leg caught up in the guardrail so he couldn't be put into the ring to be pinned. Dreamer then came to ringside and put the collar on, and it wound up with Dreamer pinning Raven to apparently win the title. However, Alfonso came out and erased the fall, saying Dreamer wasn't signed to be in the match. Todd Gordon did a run-in arguing with Alfonso. Big Dick Dudley came out and chokeslammed Dreamer, and they asked what Alfonso was going to do because the choke slam was banned. Alfonso said he rescinded the ban on the choke slam just for this night, which of course brought out 911 to finally choke slam Alfonso, which is what they've been building to for months, so it got the expected lengthy pop. As all this was going on, the Pitbulls superbombed Raven and Richards on Raven's shoulders, threw a table for the third fall pin. They wound up breaking 5 tables in the match. Mysterio Jr. beat Psychosis in a match which started slow, but they did all kinds of great moves and got over huge. Highlights were Psychosis going for a tope but Mysterio Jr. grabbing a chair and swinging it like a baseball bat to hit Psychosis. The other highlight was Mysterio Jr. doing a springboard plancha into somewhere between the 2nd and 5th row onto Psychosis, depending on how many generations old the story became. Mysterio Jr. won with a Frankensteiner off the top. They started slow because they were told to calm the crowd down from the previous match, and after 4 minutes to turn it on, which is basically what they did. Highlight of the cage match saw 3 tables stacked up on each other, and Scorpio and Rocco Rock were fighting on top of the cage and somehow beer hugged each other off the cage through all 3 tables. The match had 5-way juice and lots of brawling outside the ring even though it was a cage match. By the time the show was over, they had broken 15 tables and 9 guys had juiced. According to Heyman, Richard Friedberg, who handled the merchandise and global distributions, have been removed from the company and to expect legal action stemming from it because they are behind paying ECW their share for merchandise. Heyman is coming out with his own ECW merchandise this week. Scott Steiner no-showed the September 15th show in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania because he had been booked in Cordell, Georgia, so his TV title match with Scorpio wound up with Whipwreck as a sub. Refunds were offered although nobody asked for them. Lance Wright, who is now doing the local promos on the television show, is a former Titan production assistant who was part of the group Let Go in the most recent layoff. ECW will be on at 1 a.m. Sundays every week on MSG Cable through the end of October. October 2, 1995. Steve Austin appeared on the September 23 ECW house show in Middletown, New York, and will make his first appearance on the television show this coming week. Austin, fired on September 15 by WCW, is still about 6 weeks away from getting back in the ring because of a torn tricep suffered while on a tour with New Japan. Austin, who will be billed as the Extreme Superstar, a combination spoof on WWF calling all its wrestlers superstars and perhaps as a modern-day Billy Graham, is no doubt going to be pushed as ECW World Champion as soon as they can viably get the belt on him. As of this point, there are no serious negotiations that I know of between Austin and All Japan, which would enable Austin to remain long-term with ECW and still make a major league living at wrestling. Obviously, his long-term tenure in ECW will be based on whether or not either the group improves itself to the point he can make a competitive living with it, or he can use ECW as a supplement to a regular Japan gig. In his first television interview, Austin mocked Hulk Hogan by calling himself the Stevester and that Steve-O Mania was running wild, and said that it was unfortunate that he wasn't a good enough wrestler to get past mid-card in WCW. Lineups for the weekend shows are October 6th in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, with Public Enemy vs. Raven and Steve Richards in a double tables match, Too Cold Scorpio vs. Tommy Dreamer for the TV title, Pit Bulls defending the tag titles, Jason and Eliminators vs. Taz and 911 and Mikey Whipwreck, Gangstas vs. Dudley Dudley and Dances with Dudley, and Cactus Jack vs. Hack Myers. October 7th at the ECW Arena is Sandman vs. Whipwreck for the ECW title, Scorpio vs. JT Smith for the TV title, Pit Bulls vs. Raven and Richards for the tag titles with 911 and Big Dick Dudley at ringside and Todd Gordon and Bill Alfonso as referees, Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. Psychosis 2 of 3 Falls, Conan vs. Dudley Dudley, Taz vs. Jason and Eliminators vs. Dudleys. ECW starts on the America One Network, which is a series of low-power stations on Friday nights at 7 p.m. starting this coming week. They'll also be on full-power stations in Reading, Pennsylvania, Dallas, Flagstaff, Arizona, Kannapolis, North Carolina, Kenosha, Wisconsin, St. George, Utah, Holly Springs, Tennessee, and Cordell, Georgia. The only house show of the week was in Middletown, New York, with the Steve Austin debut. Cactus Jack started his new gimmick of turning on hardcore fans. He wrestled the entire match scientifically, not doing any of his normal maneuvers. He'd tease punching and using chairs and then not throw the blows, and would tell fans they don't deserve to see blood. Later in the show, when Scorpio was defending the TV title against Dreamer, Jack DDT'd Dreamer to set up Scorpio's win. Sandman and Whipwreck turned their match into a ladder match, and Sandman climbed the ladder to the ceiling and did a leg drop hanging from the ceiling, and Whipwreck did a Frankensteiner off the ladder. Cactus Jack did one of the greatest interviews in the history of wrestling on the September 19th television show. I write that every week, but he tops himself every week. The show also aired the Raven and Richards title loss to the Pit Bulls, which was an elaborate booking job with numerous twists and turns leading to Todd Gordon counting the 3 count after a superbomb with Richards on Raven's shoulders, as both were thrown down off the corner post. La Parka may debut on the October 28th show, although I'm not sure that's a definite. There were no police charges filed against Mustafa stemming from his conduct, where the police hauled him out of the Philadelphia Travel Lodge, and he was back in action over the weekend. They are scheduled for monthly shows at the Casino Magic in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi starting on November 9th, and are looking at doing monthly stops there and in Baton Rouge. October 9th, 1995. No shows this past weekend. Added to the October 7th ECW Arena show will be a Public Enemy vs. Gangstas match, which will actually be a street fight on the street, held outdoors on a trestle which is about a block from the arena. I think they are going to set up a ring there, but I'm not even sure of that. The Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. Psychosis match, 4 1/4 stars, aired on the September 26th television show, and besides the match itself being great, Joey Styles did one hell of a job of commentary. I'd say the presentation and hype of new wrestlers of this match, as opposed to the job WCW has done in introducing new wrestlers who can really wrestle, has been about a 180-degree difference. Don't expect to see Sabu back after all. Sabu is working on October 28th for Dennis Coralluzzo in Woodbury, New Jersey, which is the same date as an ECW Arena show, and Paul Heyman is pretty adamant if Sabu works against him that he's not going to bring him back, figuring that the way things are going for each, that Sabu needs him more than he needs Sabu. Incidentally, WCW has sent Sabu a contract, but he hasn't signed it yet. October 16, 1995. Among other notes from the October 7th show at the ECW Arena, which didn't end until 12:30 a.m., saw the Eliminators, Perry Saturn and John Cronus of War, look impressive in a squash win over Tony Stetson and Chad Austin. Taz beat Jason in less than 1 minute. After the match, a small newcomer named Pablo Pena, who I believe works as Ubas, which is Sabu spelled backwards on Pennsylvania Indies, did a springboard plancha on Jason. Cactus Jack then beat the guy doing his gimmick of nothing but wrist holds. After the match, Jack, Tommy Dreamer and Raven got into it with Raven hitting Dreamer with a chair but Jack leaving rather than using a chair. Jack came back with his arm wrapped in barbed wire and did an elbow off the second rope through a table to Dreamer. It should be noted that they broke even more tables on this show than the previous one, including tables breaking in just about every match on the card. Conan beat Dudley in a poor match which saw both men booed and people chant "You both suck." After the match, Conan got on the house mic and said next time he comes to Philadelphia that Paul E. Dangerously and Todd Gordon better get him someone who could wrestle or he'd never come back again. This drew some heat with some of the wrestlers since Jeff Bradley has his friends. Psychosis and Ray Jr. then tore the house down. Even though people were into most of the rest of the show, nobody could follow these guys and the heat the rest of the show was disappointing. Too Cold Scorpio pinned JT Smith in about 1 minute when Smith held a chair and tried a moonsault and missed, giving the fans a chance to chant "UF, head up," and was pinned. Smith did a stretcher job. Hack Myers came out and challenged Scorpio but Scorpio won again with a moonsault leg drop. Before the Sandman vs. Mikey Whipwreck match, Steve Austin, who is still at least a month away from wrestling, got in the ring and challenged Sandman and they did a pull-apart. In the course of the pull-apart, Sandman and Conan went at it and also had a pull-apart with Conan beating up several jobbers in the process, which was basically Paul Heyman's last-minute idea to get him over since his match wasn't good. The Sandman Whipwreck title match had some good spots and some sloppy spots. Austin threw a ladder in and they tried to do spots with the ladder but a lot of them missed. Sandman won but the finish looked weak so they were ordered back in the ring. Sandman won again, but this restart didn't get over despite both men working very hard. There was another Dudley brothers called Bubba Ray Dudley. After the match where Raven and Richards regained the tag titles, 911 choke slammed all the Dudleys including Sign Guy Dudley, Lou D'Angeli, but not Big Dick Dudley. Most of the match was 2-on-1 because Pitbull number 1 has a torn tricep and had no business working so they injured him immediately. They were breaking tables left and right in the match. After Alfonso beat up Gordon, he put Gordon on a table, but instead of jumping on the table, he just tipped the table over. Cactus Jack did another of those best interviews in the history of pro wrestling on the October 3rd television show. Several checks from the house show September 22nd in Middletown, New York bounced. Paul Heyman said that his car was broken into and his briefcase, which had his checkbook and records, was stolen so he had to close the account but tried to contact everyone and send new checks out and most guys were contracted before the weekend. What appears to be the situation with Austin is that he was scheduled for a meeting on October 10th with Vince McMahon. He's also got talks scheduled with All Japan. If he works out a deal there, the odds are great he'll work here and be world champion and pushed as the star of the promotion. If not, it's inevitable just from a money standpoint and the fact the WWF badly needs heels who can work and young stars, and right now there isn't a long list of people who can fill that bill that he'll end up with WWF. October 27th in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania has Public Enemy vs. Sandman and Scorpio for the tag titles, Steiners and Taz vs. Dudleys, Dudley, DW Dudley and Bubba Ray Dudley, Dreamer vs. Raven Falls Count Anywhere and Whipwreck vs. Richards, October 23, 1995. No shows this past weekend. The Gangstas were officially fired over the incident in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania last week. On the TV show this week, Taz did an interview talking about Lou Thez being his childhood hero. There is some talk they will be doing segments with Thez training Taz and that Thez may be brought to the ECW arena as Taz's second. I can just imagine Thez's reaction to what goes on there. Taz is still badly hurt and can't do any suplexes because of his bad neck, which is basically his entire arsenal, and is now using the choke as a finisher, which is legal under the lenient ECW rules. It was pretty much explained like that by Joey Styles when he used it on Jason in the match on TV this past week. Steve Austin and Cactus Jack both did killer interviews on the past weekend's television. Austin basically talked about being held back in WCW and how all the promotions have been calling him, but he decided to go to ECW because Todd Gordon must have taken out another mortgage on his house to pay him. Austin talked about how he was fired in WCW from a phone call by Eric Bischoff's secretary and contrasted it to the way Dean Malenko and Eddie Guerrero left ECW. He still ran down ECW saying it was a bunch of violent crap. The only problem with all this is that it appears likely Austin is going to wind up with the WWF as he has a second meeting scheduled this week, so aside from a few great interviews, not much in the long run is going to materialize from this. Even though Paul Heyman gave an explanation about the bounce checks from the Middletown, New York show, at least some of the wrestlers are even more concerned about the future of the company, since many have been calling both WWF and WCW looking for work. The wrestler who Cactus Jack wrestled on the last show that we reported the name of as Pablo Pena was actually called El Puerto Ricano. Some additions to the October 28th show. In the Scorpio vs. Rocco Rock match for the TV title, Scorpio wins. He gets the tag team title as well and can pick his partner. Also Johnny Grunge vs. Steve Richards, and the loser has to wear a dress in what is billed as a raggedy asshole match. The November 3rd show in Reading, Pennsylvania, which was supposed to be a combined ECW and PCW show, is now just a PCW show. October 30th, 1995. No shows this weekend, with 2 cards this coming weekend, including ECW Arena. The Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. Psicosis 2 out of 3 fall match aired on the October 17th television show in its entirety. I'd give it 4 3/4 stars. It was a better match for Philadelphia than the Mexico City or Tijuana matches would have been. However, the Mexico City and Tijuana matches were better matches for their city. Mexico City was technically the best match of the 3 as far as actual wrestling and psychology. Tijuana was the most amazing performance because they were wrestling in a damp ring that everyone else on the card couldn't keep their footing in, and they were doing all their moves and didn't miss a spot. Plus had one incredible dive after another and had the best finish and biggest pop at the end. Philadelphia had great dives and more brawling but no mat wrestling and less psychology, but the fans there want constant action, so they adjusted their style for the audience they were playing to. Philadelphia also had the advantage of having Joey Styles call the match. He's able to get wrestlers with a different style over in one match, something WCW can't do with wrestlers every bit as good if they put them on television every week for a year. All 3 matches were fantastic, and they were 3 entirely different matches done in a 3-week period. Actually, one person told me that they had a match in Mexicali that went 4 falls that was the best of all of them. November 6, 1995. A combination of a fire, the lights going out, and fire extinguishers being sprayed led to a panic at the end of the October 28 ECW Arena show in Philadelphia. The strange incident could have had serious, and even dire repercussions. But it actually ended with few serious injuries stemming from an angle that went awry, combining with a planned angle resulting in mass panic among the fans. Irate fans left phone messages here and to many other places vowing never to return because of the belief the promotion was responsible for putting people's lives in danger to get an angle over and had pushed the envelope way too far, but most believe the nature of the ECW audience is such that the next show will sell out anyway. After the final match of the show, where Tommy Dreamer, Tom Laughlin, Perry Funk in his corner, pinned Cactus Jack, Michael Foley, with Raven in his corner, the heels doubled on Funk, who left for the dressing room. The 2 then destroyed a badly bloody Dreamer, who had broken his nose legit earlier in the match. Funk came out with his branding iron on fire and chased Jack and Raven. Jack went back and came out with a chair with a cloth or shirt that had lighter fluid or kerosene on it being in flames. Jack hit Dreamer with the chair and his shirt caught on fire momentarily. Apparently the chair was supposed to be thrown by Jack to the ropes, as a tease at Funk, but not meant to hit anyone. Instead, the cloth wound up on Funk, who immediately went up in flames from head to toe with his shirt burning instantaneously. Jack immediately tried to put the fire out, which of course would be breaking character. Apparently the reaction from Funk, who was on fire, in getting the cloth off him, led to cloth winding up in the first row where the flames grew larger. A fan caught on fire, although every story was different in exactly what led to the cloth being in the front row, and Funk wasn't even sure. The ring also caught on fire, possibly from the remnants of the kerosene that was used by Rocco Rock in the previous match, and since it is made of plywood underneath, the potential of what could have happened was scary, and they were very lucky nothing happened any more serious than what did. At the same time this was going on, there was a planned angle to have the lights go out, and when they were put back on, Dreamer would be hung from the eagle's nest by his hands spread apart in a crucifixion style by Raven, which is exactly what happened. However, with the fire in the front row, the lights went out to do the angle, and others started spraying the place with fire extinguishers. There was a panic in the crowd. However, most reports were that the fans left the building without much pushing and shoving, and people weren't trampled on in an escape to get out, although there was a lot of chair throwing. Numerous fans were coughing badly outside the building from the fire extinguisher and fire fumes, and a few had minor cuts and bruises because of being hit with chairs. There were fans hit by chairs who were bleeding, but none were injured seriously. At most only 1 or 2 were hospitalized. The backstage crew, after killing the power to do the angle, which caused the panic, was apparently unable to get the lights on quick enough. It appeared the most serious injuries to a fan was a hand burn from the fire by a ringside regular who was hospitalized, and Funk, who received second-degree burns on his arm and back. There were also reports of cars vandalized in the parking lot and at least one car which was stolen. Fans near the fire panicked and numerous fans outside the building were furious, blaming the promotion and Heyman for leading to a situation that got out of hand, with most of the complaints about the decision to turn the lights off to do the angle while a fire was still burning. Some, who weren't close to the fire and were in the arena viewing, were chanting ECW, ECW, thinking it was a great finish to the show. Calls to ECW the next day ranged from people who swore they would never return to those who thought it was the greatest thing they had ever seen. Funk was immediately furious after the match because of how everything went down and the fact he was badly burned and basically destroyed the dressing room, including throwing an electric fan through a table and chairs everywhere, before calming down and apologizing to everyone. Funk actually requested he wrestle on the November 18th show because he felt he needed to, because it was important for ECW to get fans back for the next show. So the next show will have Funk and Dreamer versus Raven and Cactus Jack. Heyman, who didn't want to make any comments about the situation until reviewing all the films, had told people after the show that it would be the last time fire would be used as a prop on an ECW show. Reports are it was a good show up until that point, which featured Mikey Whipwreck, John Watson, capturing the ECW title in a ladder match from the Sandman, Too Cold Scorpio both retaining the TV title and winning the tag title, picking Sandman to be his new partner, by beating Rocco Rock of Public Enemy when Rock missed a drive-by on a lit table and was pinned, and Conan and Rey Mysterio Jr. winning via count-out in an impromptu finish over Psicosis and La Parka when Psicosis did a tope into a chair swing by Mysterio, and it split his lip all the way to his nostrils and he received plastic surgery that night in the hospital. Dreamer also received a broken nose in his match. In the highlights of the stuff that was supposed to happen on October 28 before the usual sellout crowd of 1,150 fans, Scorpio won the tag titles for himself, and Sandman won. Rocco Rock basically went through a table on fire, lit his leg on fire in doing so in 24:54. At first Scorpio raised Rock's hand and acted as if he wasn't going to accept the victory in this manner, then clotheslined him and pinned him. During the match Scorpio moonsaulted off the stage onto Rock through two tables. The crowd spent most of the match chanting names of black wrestlers at Scorpio such as Virgil, Seuss and Jid. After Sandman dropped the title to Whipwreck in the ladder match, which included Sandman getting busted open hard way during the next two matches, which were JT Smith vs. El Puerto Ricano and D.W. Dudley vs. Hack Myers, Sandman quickly did a run-in and caned the hell out of both guys. He tried to do the same thing in the Scorpio match, but Johnny Grunge fought him off to keep him from interfering. Sandman was basically the star of the show. The ladder match contained some crazy spots and some missed spots. The match where the loser had to wear a dress saw Johnny Grunge beat Steve Richards. On TV the week before, Jason asked if he could wear the dress if Richards lost, and Richards agreed to it, so Jason not only wound up wearing the dress, but also a wig and lipstick, and was acting as if he was getting off on wearing women's clothes, so 911 choke slammed him. The Conan and Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. Psicosis and La Parka match was rated between 3 stars and 4.25 stars. There were a lot of good dives. The finish didn't go as planned. They had to go home early as they did a spot where both Psicosis and Parka did topes and were to be simultaneously hit by chairs coming through by Conan and Mysterio. Mysterio hit Psicosis wrong and split his face open from his mouth up to his nostril. They did one quick Mysterio dive onto both of them in the count-out finish. The fans booed the finish because it was a count-out and were chanting Dusty Finish. Apparently some were mad because they were counted out with a 10 count instead of a 20 count, as would be the case in Mexican rules. They also did an angle early in the show where Jason came out and wanted to manage the Pit Bulls again, and called current manager Francine a prostitute. The Eliminators then attacked the Pit Bulls, leaving Rick Steiner and Taz to make the save, and they did a short brawl, ending with the Pit Bulls attacking Eliminators and a 3 count was counted. The Steiners Eliminators match never took place because Scott had the stomach flu and missed the show, and Taz really isn't ready to work a match. The other weekend house show was October 27th in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, before 250 fans with no great matches, but the show was saved by some post-match brawls. Conan had a match with Cactus Jack which went 3:52 before half the dressing room came out, and Big Dick Dudley and 911 wound up choke slamming almost everyone in sight. When 911 went to choke slam Big Dick, he was hit with a crutch. Axl Rotten and Tommy Dreamer carried Conan on their shoulders and got the fans to chant "He's hardcore" at him. At both shows, Cactus Jack got on the house mic and told the fans they should go home and watch movies for men who like movies on TBS. Some talk of Missy Hyatt coming into work mixed tags with Bill Alfonso against Todd Gordon and Beulah, maybe as early as December. Next ECW Arena show is November 18th with Funk and Dreamer vs. Raven and Cactus, Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. Psychosis in a death match, Eliminators vs. Pit Bulls, Gordon vs. Alfonso, Sandman and Scorpio defending against Public Enemy, Whipwreck defending the ECW title, and Steve Austin, who won't be going to WWF anytime soon, making his in-ring debut, and possibly Chris Jericho vs. Conan. November 3rd in Reading, Pennsylvania has Dreamer vs. Cactus with the man who throws the first punch losing, Public Enemy vs. Raven and Richards, Scorpio defending TV title against Taz, who isn't ready for a regular match yet, Pit Bulls, one of whom also isn't ready for a regular match yet, versus Dudley's, Sandman vs. Hack Myers and Whipwreck defending against Jason. November 4th in Glenolden, Pennsylvania has Dreamer and Pit Bulls vs. Raven and Richards and Cactus, Whipwreck vs. Sandman for the title, Scorpio defending TV title against 911 with Taz as ref, and Public Enemy vs. Dudley's. November 17th in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania we'll have Whipwreck defending against Mysterio. November 13th, 1995. The Pennsylvania State Athletic Commission has scheduled a closed-door meeting regarding ECW for November 9th after it received numerous complaints regarding the fire going out of control combined with the lights being turned off at the October 28th ECW Arena show. Very little else is known right now regarding possible sanctions, if any, that would be considered regarding the promotion. Pennsylvania deregulated pro wrestling to an extent several years ago due to a lobbying effort by Titan Sports. The commission still gets a tax cut but basically no longer enforces any rules. There was a period where James J. Binns ran the commission's operation in the Philadelphia area, and after being freaked out at a Jim Crockett show years ago when Crockett and Dusty Rhodes were running Bloodfest shows in Philadelphia, cracked down on blading. During a show at Veterans Stadium years ago before what was at the time the largest house in the history of the state of $238,000, a record since broken by WWF pay-per-view events in both Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, Wahoo McDaniel did one of his blade jobs and the blade ended up getting caught in his forehead. Binns at first was going to stop the card at that moment. Wahoo was in an early match on the show, but was talked out of it but banned blading. When the commission was deregulated, because blading had become an issue in the political fight, Pennsylvania enacted a law making it illegal for wrestlers to blade, a law that as everyone knows has been adhered to by all promotions since that time, which pretty much tells the tale of commission involvement today in the pro wrestling scene. According to Ringsiders, what actually happened was that the towel drenched in kerosene and lighter fluid that was on fire on the chair ripped apart, with a small portion of it catching on Terry Funk's back and arms and a larger portion going into the front row, causing a pretty big fire. At roughly the same time as fire extinguishers were being sprayed to the point that people were choking on the fumes, the lights were shut off to do the crucifixion angle. The biggest news from here is that Public Enemy had a meeting with Vince McMahon on November 2nd about coming in. While no deal is confirmed right now, it is generally believed both sides were happy with the meeting, and it's more likely a question of when rather than if. The meeting was set up through Paul Heyman, as WWF has told Heyman they don't want to hurt his group or go behind his back. Most likely how it'll turn out is that Titan won't bring Public Enemy in until Heyman can finish them off in his storyline, which looks to be late January. Again, most likely the two will continue to use the names Rocco Rock and Johnny Grunge and do a similar character, but not use the name Public Enemy. The fact that both WWF and WCW were so hot to pick these guys up shows what a master manipulator Heyman really is, since he's the only one in wrestling of late who has really been able to create several new characters successfully. He's so good that even people who run wrestling companies haven't figured out that the guys he's gotten over are done more by him than through the guys actually being good workers and through things that wouldn't even be allowed within their groups. Rocco Rock is a decent worker with the willingness to do crazy stunts to get over that WWF and WCW would never let anyone do on their shows. Johnny Grunge got over on having lengthy interviews and blading. They've had great brawls by doing things like blading and breaking tables, which isn't allowed in WWF or WCW. That and the interviews and skits are how they got over. No doubt if they come in and dance, the people will dance with them in WWF, but that simply makes them the Bushwhackers or PN News. There's nothing wrong with that. If all sides can make money, that's what having a job and running a business are all about. But there are people who are fooled into believing these guys are better workers than teams like the Heavenly Bodies or Smoking Guns. That's to Heyman's credit. He also got a lot of people to believe Sabu was the best worker in the business last year, who probably now realize just how far from the mark that really was. WWF seems to have lost interest in 911, however. The most talked about thing on this past week's television was Steve Austin. Austin wore a black wig impersonating Eric Bischoff's announcing on Monday Night where the big boys play with each other. He got in some funny lines, including pretending to fall asleep calling the matches because the matches are so boring, building up a match with Geritol on top of a pole for all the old codgers in WCW, and making light of Bischoff not being able to call matches because he doesn't know any of the moves. Later in the show from the last ECW arena show, he climbed the ladder before the Mikey Whipwreck vs. Sandman title change match and insulted woman, calling her a $5 piece of ass and saying that she married a midget. Needless to say, this didn't go over very well in the WCW office. Give woman credit for being professional enough to go along with something she couldn't have been thrilled with doing because it's the direction the booker wants to go in. At least 2 other ECW names are said to be close to joining WCW, close enough that storylines have already been prepared for them. They ran 2 house shows over the weekend. On November 3rd in Reading, Pennsylvania before 300, it was described as one of the worst ECW house shows to date and basically on par with a WWF house show for work because the commission was there and they cut way back on brawling and didn't do any blading or break any tables. Local wrestlers Bad Crew worked the show. Public Enemy beat Raven and Richards on top in a match that was the closest thing to saving the show. Taz was advertised to face Scorpio for the TV title, but the faces all held him back and the refs said the commission wouldn't allow him to wrestle because of his neck injury, and Axel Rotten took his place. On November 4th in Glenolden, Pennsylvania, they had what was described as a typical ECW spot show before 250 fans with Pit Bulls and Tommy Dreamer over Raven and Richards and Cactus Jack on top, and Whipwreck keeping the title, beating Sandman. Sandman has been living in Utah the past several weeks, having taken a construction job there and is being flown in every weekend. Missy Hyatt has told people she won't be coming in after all. A November 23rd show in Danbury, Connecticut has a cage match with stipulations to be announced with Dreamer and Public Enemy and Pit Bulls versus Cactus and Raven and Richards and Sandman and Scorpio, Whipwreck defending against Austin, Illuminators versus Dudleys, and 911 versus 4 men. November 20, 1995. A hearing was held on November 9 regarding ECW with the Pennsylvania State Athletic Commission in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania regarding the incident on the October 28 show where they turned the lights off during the fire angle. Officially, the meeting was confidential, and all that has officially come out of the meeting is that the state attorney general and lawyers for both sides are reviewing punishment, which would be made public in 2 weeks. From our sources, it appears that Ed Zone, who was the promoter of record for the ECW show, will be fined, technically for not having a doctor at the show in violation of state law for pro wrestling. Since the commission for the most part stopped regulating what went in within pro wrestling a few years back, they were powerless to fine anyone else, although it is said that Paul Heyman was told, in no uncertain terms, that if another incident were to occur like this, that ECW would be shut down. Heyman has told numerous people since the October 28 show that he would never use fire again in one of his angles. There are reports that Zone and ECW have split and that either Todd Gordon will get a promoter's license or ECW will use another local promoter's license. However, reports that the commission or the fire marshal have ordered the group not to put more than 700 fans in the ECW arena in the future appear to be not true. There is also a good chance several of ECW's top regular acts will be leaving shortly. The situation with Public Enemy has changed somewhat since last week. Kevin Sullivan offered the two a 6-month contract to join WCW. Reports from those close to the two indicate they may, if anything, be slightly leaning toward WCW rather than WWF because the wrestlers they've talked with in WWF gave them less than favorable versions of the current situation. There were less teams to work with, and on the surface it appeared working for the WWF meant working more dates on the road for less money. There are other considerations in WCW's favor, and also in WWF's favor. They do a better job of getting acts over, and Ted Petty, who is now 43, has had a goal for nearly the past 20 years of getting to the WWF. Reports are that WWF would use them as a tag team called Assault and Battery, while WCW's idea was to give them the tag team named the Mac Daddies, both keeping the same basic gimmick. Heyman, who claims ECW is on the verge of doing a pay-per-view show, wants to keep them at least through mid-January, or longer if they can secure a pay-per-view date. The other name who met with Titan this past week was Cactus Jack. Jack, who has just moved from New York to Atlanta, was thought due to his look and style to be a wrestler the WWF would never be interested in, but times have changed. He was said to be very close to going, with some saying it could be shortly after Royal Rumble. Heyman supposedly told WWF officials, which have been attempting to make friends rather than enemies, that he didn't want to lose Jack until he could properly finish this current program, which he said would be April of 1996, and WWF said they were in no hurry to bring him in. WWF is also looking at ECW as a place where they can send their own wrestlers to get work next year, since they aren't going to be running as many house shows and guys are already complaining about not getting enough dates. Jack is longtime good friends with Troy Martin, WWF's Dean Douglas, who is well known to be unhappy with his situation with Titan, which may prove to be a factor as well. Woman Nancy Sullivan is almost certainly headed to WCW after the first of the year. If Sherry Martel is phased out, Woman will manage Harlem Heat. If not, the word is that she'll be brought in to manage Diamond Dallas Page, and feud with Johnny B. Bad, who will be managed by Page's real-life wife Kimberly Diamond Doll. WCW is also making a strong push to bring in Conan in January, although he hasn't been around long enough to be established as a key player in ECW. No shows this past weekend. The November 18th show will sell out, so as it turned out, the October 28th incident had no negative effect on ticket sales. The show may be Terry Funk's last U.S. match for a long time. ECW is looking at making Danbury, Connecticut and possibly an arena in Queens as regular sites for house shows. The Danbury, Connecticut show on Thanksgiving night looks like a sellout in an 850-seat nightclub. They'll also debut on November 25th in Salisbury Beach, Massachusetts at Champs Arena, about 45 minutes from Boston, with Tommy Dreamer vs. Raven, Too Cold Scorpio vs. 911, Public Enemy vs. Dudley's, Eliminators vs. Pit Bulls, and Mikey Whipwreck vs. Sandman. John Cronus and Perry Saturn, Eliminators, are pretty much putting this show together. For ticket info you can call 508-462-1279. November 27, 1995. Sabu, Terry Brunk, returned to the ECW arena in an unannounced match on November 18, beating Hack Myers in a move that has a number of political ramifications. Sabu was introduced earlier in the show as Paul Heyman came out and said he had a surprise for the fans and was going to turn out the lights, and said there would be no fire and no fire extinguishers in this surprise. When the light came back on, Sabu was in the ring pointing to the ceiling and the crowd was chanting "Thank you" as Sabu and Heyman hugged in the ring. According to Heyman, Sabu and Heyman reached a deal on November 1st for Sabu to appear on the November 18th show, but Heyman wanted it kept as a surprise. The two agreed for Sabu to work only the one show, which at press time is all that had been officially agreed to, although there is obviously a good chance Sabu will be back as a regular. The results of this surprise were numerous. Sabu had been working with WCW, although to the best of our knowledge never had signed the contract offered him. WCW had been upset with Sabu for numerous reasons, such as him brawling out of the ring more than they wanted him to and going longer than scheduled in some television matches. In addition, the Sheik wasn't supposed to throw fire at the pay-per-view show, and it caught everyone at WCW by surprise. Sabu was unhappy at being a mid-card performer, and those in WWF say he insisted on not having his weight announced because of the belief if he was categorized as a junior heavyweight, he couldn't work on top. WCW allows its wrestlers to work indie shows provided they don't work for WWF, SMW and ECW, which are considered as enemy promotions. It was no secret within the company that the wrestlers and booking committee, while admitting to his guts and work ethic, thought he was a poor worker, which is why they kept his matches short. Sabu working the ECW date, particularly since it was kept a secret from WCW management, put himself in a tenuous position. Sabu, who had left for a Japan tour at press time and wasn't able to be reached, had told another reporter before leaving that he called up Bischoff on November 20th, and Bischoff told him he was too busy to talk with him at the time. He said he then watched Nitro and heard Bischoff on commentary talk about a wrestler who is no longer with the company and to call the WCW hotline to find out who, and he called the Mike Tenay message, and that's how he found out he was fired. On the hotline, Tenay talked about the Sabu situation and speculated Sabu may be in trouble with the company, but Sabu hadn't been told anything by that point. While it had been reported elsewhere Sabu had quit WCW, nobody in WCW was aware of the fact, nor was Sabu, although many were aware of tension between the two sides and thought a split was inevitable either way. He was still booked and advertised for both the Battle Royal on the November 26th pay-per-view show and also to face Eddie Guerrero on the December 11th Nitro card from Charlotte. However, he probably wasn't going to make either date either way since his 3-week tour of Japan began on November 23rd. Even stranger is the situation regarding Sabu and NWA promoter Dennis Coraluzzo. Coraluzzo had asked Sabu to work on an afternoon show on November 18th in Camden, New Jersey in early October, well before Sabu and Devon Storm tore the house down on October 28th. Sabu turned down the date in early October, claiming a booking in San Bernardino, California. there was an indie show in San Bernardino that night. According to Coraluzzo, on November 13, Sabu called him up and said that either the show itself had been cancelled in California or that Sabu had cancelled the San Bernardino date because New Japan booked him for the week, but then cancelled the shows that week, presumably a Heisei Ishgun tour since New Japan cancelled all high shows and New Japan never had any shows scheduled for that week. He told Coraluzzo he would fly himself in to work the Camden show and pay for his hotel room. The two agreed on Sabu to work for less than his usual price because most of the local publicity had been done without Sabu's name, but since Coraluzzo had gotten clearance from the WWF to use Hakushi on the show, he figured he could get the word around in 5 days of a Sabu vs Hakushi match and it would draw some extra fans. Because WWF initially freaked out about a supposed WCW vs WWF matchup and wanted it stopped, but then relented since it wants to keep good relations with all promoters, Coraluzzo had to work a DQ finish because WWF insisted Hakushi not do the job to a WCW wrestler and Sabu is the one Coraluzzo wanted to push. At the show they shot an angle to lead to future Sabu vs Devon Storm matches on Coraluzzo shows in December when Storm interfered for the DQ and Sabu put both Storm and his manager through a table after the match. Coraluzzo said that Sabu had told him all along that he knew he would go back to ECW for one date because Todd Gordon would pay him a lot for it, but insisted he had no plans to do so at that point and never told Coraluzzo of his plans to work the evening show to the point where Coraluzzo found out after the show was over. Coraluzzo claimed he outright asked Sabu about it and Sabu denied it, and was really upset about it because he considered Sabu a friend more than a business associate, saying he didn't begrudge Sabu the opportunity to make money, but he felt bad because Sabu made an ass out of him and that Sabu has always told him they were good friends and he didn't think that kind of a move is something friends do to friends. Heyman said that Sabu asked him after he had already agreed to do the ECW arena show if he could work the Camden show, claiming Coraluzzo was the one who asked him to work the date. Heyman said he had no problem with it and actually liked the idea because it would explain to ECW fans who saw Sabu at the hotel why he was in town that weekend. He said that if any of his fans knew Sabu was going to work the ECW show, he'd have canceled the booking and told Sabu not to tell anyone. However, word of Sabu's doing the ECW date started spreading on November 11th, and by midweek it had become a strong rumor in wrestling and was reported on the Observer hotline that it would most likely happen. And when Heyman talked about the surprise in the ring, there were chants for Sabu before he showed up. However, Coraluzzo was unaware of any of this, nor had Sabu told anyone while he was in Philadelphia. Sabu later told another publication that he hadn't made up his mind until 6 p.m. that night when ECW came through with the money, which he said was the single biggest one-night payoff he had ever received as a pro wrestler in the United States. He wouldn't say what the figure was, but when the figure of $1,500 was brought up to him, he said it was well in excess of that. Sabu later called Coraluzzo wanting to keep his December dates, and according to Coraluzzo told him that he didn't decide until the last minute to do the ECW show and did it because he was getting a $3,000 one-night payoff which was too much to turn down. Coraluzzo claims Sabu told him that because he felt badly about what happened, he offered to pay Coraluzzo half his payoff. He said he hadn't told Coraluzzo about it because he didn't know for sure if they would come up with the money until he got to the hotel, and they gave it to him after the Camden show was over. Heyman refused to comment on the size of the payoff, saying he didn't want to give credibility to anything Coraluzzo said by responding to it. The figure on the surface seems hard to believe from a business standpoint. The argument can be made that business often goes out the window and anything is possible in a wrestling war. Sabu told Coraluzzo he asked Heyman for $2,000 per shot for the future and Heyman had agreed to his price, which Heyman also refused comment on. November 18th at the ECW arena before a turnaway capacity crowd saw Bubba Ray Dudley, who got a huge pop through the ring announcing and did the announcing fine until stuttering on the phrase, "Let's get ready to rumble." He then destroyed Tony Stetson and Don E. Allen in a handicap match. Paul E. Dangerously then came out and introduced Sabu. Conan pinned Jason in 30 seconds when special ref Taz laid Jason out. Steve Richards pinned El Puerto Ricano. During the match, Richards brought out a new flunky called the Blue Meanie, Brian Rollins, with blue hair and bossed him around and told him to moonsault El Puerto but he missed. Pit Bulls beat Eliminators. Rey Mysterio Jr. beat Psicosis in a Mexican death match. Rules were that falls didn't count, although falls could be taken anywhere in the building, and the bout ended when one wrestler after a fall couldn't beat the count and get back in the ring. Mysterio Jr. used a Frankensteiner off the top of the stage to the bottom of the stage onto Psicosis for a pin and Psicosis, who was ahead 4-2 in falls, couldn't get back in. Match wasn't as good as usual since Mysterio Jr.'s ankle was badly swollen and he was limping badly, although he still did an incredible Asai moonsault. Sandman and Too Cold Scorpio kept the tag titles, beating Public Enemy in a match where the man who took the fall would get a singles title match later in the show. Fans chanted "Please don't go" at Public Enemy. Grunge juiced heavily. Sandman ended up getting the pin and Public Enemy was obviously being phased down. Bill Alfonso beat Todd Gordon in a surprisingly entertaining match. Beulah McGillicuddy was the ref, but she was KO'd by Alfonso early and carried out. Alfonso juiced when Gordon gave him a chair shot. Taz came out and turned on Gordon and counted as Alfonso pinned him. Taz complained after that when the various wrestlers in ECW have gotten hurt, everyone sends cards and worries about them, but nobody cared when he got hurt. Sandman then came to the ring for his title match, but was jumped by Austin and destroyed. With Sandman unable to wrestle, Austin got the title match, and in a surprise, put Whipwreck over clean. Austin looked rusty but the match was still decent. Sabu then pinned Myers in what virtually everyone said was the best match Myers has ever been in. Sabu did just about everything under the sun, including leaping off a chair into a backflip over the top rope through a table on the floor. Finale saw Terry Funk and Tommy Dreamer over Raven and Cactus Jack in a bloody match with all four using all the gimmicks given by the fans. Jack wore both a Dungeon of Doom t-shirt and later a Forgive Me Uncle Eric t-shirt with Bischoff's face on it. Of course they pulled the shirt over Jack's face and Dreamer began punching the Bischoff face on the shirt over and over. After the match, Funk teased a retirement speech without actually saying it, saying he loved wrestling but his body couldn't take it anymore and basically was passing the torch as the king of hardcores to Dreamer. November 17th in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania before 475 was headlined by Whipwreck over Mysterio Jr. in a 3.5 stars title defense. Shane Douglas was at the show backstage. December 1st in Reading, Pennsylvania had Mikey Whipwreck vs. Sandman for the title, Too Cold Scorpio vs. Austin for the TV title. November 23rd in Danbury, Connecticut has Ultimate Jeopardy 95 with Public Enemy and Pit Bulls and Dreamer vs. Jack and Raven and Richards and Scorpio and Sandman. If Public Enemy lose, they must have a singles match against each other. If Pit Bulls lose, they must split up. If Dreamer loses, he gets his head shaved. If Cactus loses, he leaves ECW. If Raven loses, the man who wins gets Beulah for 1 month. If Richards loses, he must spend 5 minutes alone with all 5 men on the other team. If Scorpio loses, he loses both the TV title and tag title. And if Sandman loses, Woman must leave ECW and he and Scorpio also forfeit the tag titles. The Connecticut Post ran a front-page story on November 20th on ECW about it being a politically incorrect wrestling promotion. The story was built around the Danbury, Connecticut show where Thomas Rodriguez brought them in as part of the grand opening of his Sub-Zero nightclub. According to the story, they had nearly sold out the 500-seat venue days in advance. The article was huge, with both pros and cons. Among those interviewed for the piece was Greg Zerb of the Pennsylvania State Athletic Commission. Zerb said that ECW pushes the line and have given him more than one headache, but that since Pennsylvania deregulated wrestling, there's little he could do beyond lifting the license of the promoter, but that would do no good because they would just use another license. Woman was upset with the report that she was leaving for WCW here last week and was denying it backstage over the weekend. Conan did officially give notice that it would be his last show, saying he was going to WCW. Heyman talked with him about the idea of going to WWF because he'd be able to work ECW house show dates if he went to WWF, but Conan pretty well committed going to WCW in January. Conan did promise to continue to work with Heyman in regard to booking AAA talent for future ECW dates, although with the December 9th Los Angeles show, Mysterio Jr. and Psicosis won't be available for the next ECW Arena show. December 9th at the ECW Arena will almost definitely be headlined by a triangular match for the title with Whipwreck, Sandman, and Austin. December 4th, 1995. The only house show of the weekend was November 25th in Salisbury Beach, Massachusetts, before an estimated 275 fans. There was no blood and no broken tables, but reports are the work rate was very good and the crowd enthusiasm was really high throughout. In an ECW deathmatch, Raven beat Tommy Dreamer when Taz came in with a ref shirt and clocked Dreamer and put Raven on top, continuing his heel turn. The Eliminators, Perry Saturn and John Cronus, who were involved in basically putting the show together, were cheered by the crowd since they were announced from Boston, but still insulted the crowd and played heel, beating the Pit Bulls. Public Enemy had a hot 3 3/4 stars match with the Bubba Ray and dances with Dudley, with all the brawling with fans providing foreign objects and chanting "Please don't go" at them in reference to their considering going to WWF or WCW. As of press time, the two still hadn't made a final decision. The main event saw Mikey Whipwreck beat Sandman to keep the ECW title, and they had a brawl at the end which wound down to Raven and Steve Richards beating on Dreamer until 911 made the save, choke slamming both to end the show. 2 Cold Scorpio was scheduled for a TV title match against 911 with Taz as ref, but the match never took place as Scorpio, now called 2 Gold Scorpio since he holds the TV and tag titles, wasn't there. Scorpio missed the show because he was called in early for his Germany tour. The Thanksgiving night Ultimate Jeopardy show scheduled for Danbury, Connecticut was canceled the day before. The match itself will be modified since Sandman won't be involved and most likely rebooked for the December 9th ECW Arena show. The Danbury show was pretty much sold out in a 400-seat nightclub that was scheduled to open the day before. There's a lot of confusion regarding the cancellation. Officially, the roof of the nightclub wasn't up to city ordinances and the club still hasn't gotten permission to open. Some believe the front page article in the Connecticut Post, which Paul Heyman loved, about the rowdy and violent atmosphere in ECW created a stir because of misinformation in the article and confusing ECW with the political hot potato of extreme fighting that was so big in the news. Due to an editing error, an editor at the paper mentioned extreme fighting being banned in New York, thinking extreme fighting and ECW were the same thing even though the author didn't have it in his original story. Promoter Tom Rodriguez blamed that confusion on city officials finding a reason for the club not to open. The Connecticut Commission also made a call being concerned about the show, believing it was extreme fighting and not pro wrestling, which they have no regulatory power over, but contrary to word elsewhere, the Commission had nothing to do with the show not taking place directly and probably nothing indirectly. From what we gather, even when the nightclub opens, because of all the problems, ECW won't be doing a show there. Heyman felt the club was too small for the crowd he thinks he can draw in the city and is planning on going back to the city in a different location over Christmas week, and the club owner told others he didn't want them any longer. The plan is also to open up at Lost Battalion Hall in Queens, New York for monthly shows starting in December. Steve Austin is said to be seriously considering going to All Japan, which would allow him to work here between tours. WWF is still very interested in him as well. December 1st in Reading, Pennsylvania has Whipwreck vs. Raven for the ECW title, Pitbulls vs. Eliminators with Taz and 911 as refs, Austin vs. Dreamer, Public Enemy vs. Dudleys, and Richards vs. Hackmeyers. The Heavenly Bodies debuted doing a run-in attacking Public Enemy after the Enemy vs. Dudley Brothers match on December 1st in Reading, Pennsylvania at the group's only house show of the week before approximately 350 fans. This sets up a Public Enemy vs. Bodies match for December 9th at the ECW Arena, plus a 6-on-5 Ultimate Jeopardy cage match for the same show. It's basically a done deal that Public Enemy is going to WCW, and the last word we heard was that the final show for ECW would be billed as something like the Final House Party on January 6th. Anyway, Ultimate Jeopardy has Bodies vs. Public Enemy, Raven vs. Tommy Dreamer, and Pitbulls vs. Eliminators. Whichever team wins 2 of the 3 matches will get the first advantage in War Games-like rules in the cage match, which will have Enemy and Bulls and Dreamer vs. Raven and Richards and Bodies and Eliminators. If Rocco Rock or Johnny Grunge get pinned, they must face each other in a singles match that night. If Pitbulls lose, they split up and whomever scores the pin gets Francine for 1 week. If Dreamer loses, he gets his head shaved. If Raven loses, whomever scores the pin on him gets Beulah for 1 week. If Richards loses, he must spend 5 minutes in a cage alone against all 5 members of the other team. If Eliminators lose, Jason gets his head shaved and they leave ECW. If Tom Pritchard or Jimmy Del Rey lose, all the stipulations regarding Raven, Eliminators and Richards will go into effect. ECW debuts in Queens, New York at Lost Battalion Hall on December 29th with Sabu vs. Cactus Jack in a death match, Sandman vs. Steve Austin, Tommy Dreamer vs. Raven, Mikey Whipwreck vs. 2 Cold Scorpio, Public Enemy vs. Heavenly Bodies, and Pitbulls vs. Eliminators. They will be back on the Prime Sports Network on January 1st and back on American Independent Network on Tuesday nights at 10 p.m. starting on December 12th. After doing the run-in, Pritchard also worked a singles match against Dreamer, losing via DQ. He subbed for Steve Austin, who was announced as having missed his plane in. Bruce Pritchard was backstage at this show. Also on the card was Bruiser Mastino, Mantor in WWF, but he was booked on the show by local promoter Damian Kane, so it's not a sign that he's headed to ECW. Chuck Williams, formerly Rockin' Rebel in ECW, also worked the show. Apparently he was booked by Kane as well and showed up, but Paul Heyman didn't want to use him because he fired him some time ago, but since he drove all the way and other wrestlers stood up for him, Heyman agreed to let him work as a ninja under a hood. Bubba Ray Dudley got the best crowd reactions of anyone on the show. Cactus Jack did another set of incredible interviews on this past week's television, showing up in a suit and tie with his hair slicked back, doing a spoof on every Kiss the Fans Ass Babyface interview from the 70s, finishing by doing a ventriloquist bit with a stuffed animal waving bye-bye to all the hardcore fans. Sometimes I wonder if the people who watch his interviews figure out the message he's delivering with them. Anyway, this was different from the rest but no less brilliant. This is the end of this conversion. Be sure to comment and subscribe. See you next time.